Explain what the Fed is. The Federal Reserve System of the United States is essentially the central bank of the U.S. I think that we all know this. It was established in 1913 or 1923, one of those days, like about a century ago. And prior to that, we had a gold standard. But we didn't have as many boom bust cycles. We didn't have as much inflation. We didn't have such, our money supply didn't expand to such a extent that is currently worth about 1% of its former value. So for these reasons and others, I believe that we need to completely abolish the Fed. I don't think we should do it from the beginning because I think that would send too great of a shock to the economic system. But I think we need to take steps. We need to take gradual steps to abolishing the Fed. For example, we should first start to audit the Fed. Then we should abolish, just limit what the Fed can do, and then eventually, over a few years, finally abolish it. What do you guys think? Do you support the Fed, or are you guys against the Fed? And then I will further argument my reasoning.
You know, I know you can very easily make the argument nowadays that the Fed is too big and too powerful, but I don't think you should get rid of the Fed. I don't think that's practical.
Why not?
Just in terms of stability, I think we do need a central bank. We need something like the Fed in existence. Now, I know this is your big issue. You've probably read a little more about it than I have, but just from a historical perspective, when you get rid of something like that, when you get rid of the central bank, whether you do it overnight or over several years, like you said, it's just not going to end well. You need that stability.
Now, here's the thing. Every time we've had a central bank, we've had less stability. For example, we before this, we had a gold standard. It was more stable. We had less recessions. We've had less busts. But every time we've created a central bank, that boom-bust cycle accelerated. We kept getting more and more of them. It became less and less stable.
I would disagree with that, actually, for several reasons. First of all, historically, the U.S. struggled with the gold standard. We started with the silver standard. We switched to a mix of silver and gold. We changed the standard several times because it was not nearly as stable as it sounds. For example, every time you found a new supply of gold, the currency was devalued, right? We were at the whims of geology here. I'd much rather be at the whims of market forces that are hard to predict than at what geological discoveries someone makes. In the modern market, you also have the potential for the demand for gold changing, since it's used in for practical purposes such as circuits, not just jewelry. So I don't think that we can take the stability of a metal-based standard for granted. I think we've had more boom and bust cycles in modern times because we've had a more developed economy. We've had, financial products. There's more. The GDP itself is bigger, right? So it has the opportunity to go up and down more. We have a more specialized economy, a less agrarian-based economy. So I think those factors are responsible for the more rapid boom and bust cycles.
You mentioned the whims of the market, but it's more like the whims of the rich and the secretive, because if you look at the foundation of the Federal Reserve, it was J.P. Morgan who founded it, pretty much. Him and Rockefeller got together and they're like, we need a centralized bank, and they lobbied for it, and it worked. And that's why you don't know what's going on behind the closed doors of the Fed. If you watch Wall Street 2, I know it's the Hollywood dramatization, but it's a pretty good representation. They're sitting there in their chairs with their brandy and all the time about what we should do in order to keep the economy stable and keep all the businesses on Wall Street going. And I don't want one group of people to have that much power. I don't think we can make it all state, but we should at least limit their power.
At the risk of sounding actually kind of like you, I would much rather trust a small secretive group of economists who fundamentally still have an interest in the economy not failing, right, than populist politicians.
Now, this is where I would like to cut in. I wasn't very clear before, so I'll start from the beginning. I'll start with how it was formed. It was formed about a century ago. It was formed by top bankers. They essentially wanted a safety net for themselves, so if their own banks failed, so that they wouldn't be held responsible, so that they could get their money back, so that it essentially a safety net to keep themselves safe. That's why it was formed. At first, it was far smaller than it is now. The Fed's powers have increased over the years for whatever reasons. I'm not sure what those reasons are, but it was never meant to be this big. Now, The Fed, over the past hundreds of years, what has it done? What was the primary job of the Fed? It was to increase inflation. That was why it was created. During the Great Depression, what helped farmers essentially get out of debt? Inflation. What has the Fed only done throughout its entire existence? Inflation. The Fed can't deflate currency because obviously it can't destroy it. All it can do is make currency worth less. That's all it can do.
Well,
In addition to that, all the Fed can do is send false signals. What does the Fed do? It manipulates things like interest rates. When you manipulate things like interest rates, that distorts the free market economy. That's what leads to bubbles, the housing bubble. Why did people begin buying houses they couldn't afford? Because interest rates were low. Why were the interest rates so low? Because the Fed made them low. The people essentially thought, oh, okay, the interest rates are low. This is good for me. I can afford to buy a house. What they didn't realize was that this was an unnatural signal to them.
look, the manipulating. If I can get in one quick word, the whole manipulating the free market thing goes both ways, right? When you have a gold standard, you are saying that the price of gold is X. You are fixing that price, so you're still manipulating the market. That happens either way, and the Fed does have the power to cause deflation as well. Its mandate is to balance inflation and deflation, not just create inflation. It can do that by
The
raising
Fed has
interest
never
rates.
been able to actually physically lower inflation. It has never been able to. It does not have that power.
I would beg to differ, simply because the Fed did successfully fight
Give
inflation
me an
during the
example of
Carter era.
how it has physically lowered inflation.
Stagflation, open market operations to reduce the currency supply, or rather decrease the money
It
supply.
didn't actually decrease inflation. The inflation did not go down. If anything, it stayed where it was, or maybe increased without any economic growth, but it didn't actually physically go down.
Then how come it's not still where it was? The inflation rate went down, which allowed us to then bring the unemployment rate down.
If it went down, that wasn't because of the Fed's actions, because the Fed physically, the Fed itself can't make it go down.
Then
If
what
anything,
would
it was more the free market. If anything, it was actions of the free market rather than the actual Fed itself,
I don't see how you can argue that it can only cause inflation, not disinflation, seeing as it controls the money supply.
because they can't destroy the money supply.
Yes, it can.
No, if
You can
it
buy money for-
unless you go and you burn the actual money that's in circulation, it can't destroy the money
Okay,
supply.
how does it create money?
By
It creates
printing
money.
it. That's what it does. It
Open
literally
market
prints money.
operations, it buys bonds, putting money into the market.
It
Yes.
prints more money. It literally has a printing press. It
No,
Well,
it
prints
doesn't.
you're,
more
ta- you're
money.
talking. You guys are talking about
Inflation.
two different operations here. It can do that. There's quantitative easing.
That's what
but
it
does
does
It does
all
it
the
very
time.
rarely.
It does it all the time.
It only does it now, where we are.
Why do you
at a
think
risk-
money is worth so much less than it used to be? Why do you think, as opposed to when 10 years ago, when you could go to a country in Europe, you would feel rich. Your money would be worth a lot more,
Look,
as opposed to
Having
now.
money worth less, it helps our exports, and quite frankly, I'd rather get stuck with uncomfortable inflation that can be countered than get stuck in a permanent deflationary cycle like Japan's been in for 2 decades, and it doesn't look like it has a way out of. Inflation is a lot easier to combat than deflation, and I'll let you continue.
Yeah.
We actually are running out of time for this, so we can all discuss this later. I'll go in a circle. You guys can say what you all think. We'll start with you, Zach.
I mean, I think I've made my position fairly clear. The Fed may not be perfect, but it's better than the alternative. I'd rather have a manipulatable system which can correct itself than be at the whims of the metal markets.
I like to add the manipulative system, the economists control, people who are only with their own interests in hand. No one knows what they're actually doing. Only a few actions are made public because we are not allowed to audit
I
them.
mean, most of the people in the Fed are not currently
Okay, we'll keep going.
in the finance
Devin.
industry, but yes.
Okay, I again believe that the Fed isn't perfect, however, it's much better than the alternative as did by Zach. I believe that there's a fine balance making it politically independent while still having some check on weakening the secrecy and the focus on protecting Wall Street against other things. I believe that you made some interesting points, but I think you're misunderstanding the Fed's powers of open operation, or open market operations rather.
I believe we should limit their power to print money and stuff. So we don't want inflation. We should also increase the transparency because we should know what they're up to. And the ability to audit it would also be very helpful. So I think we should either really limit their power by doing those three things, or switch to a state bank system that cooperates with themselves.
I agree with Zach and Devin. It's by no means is it perfect, as recent events have shown, but I really do believe it's better than any alternative we have right now.
I completely disagree. If we had more time, I would further explain why, but we don't. So now we'll be going on to our next topic, which is the hot button topic, which is campaign finance reform.